Welcome back to Secret Weapons. Today we're taking a look at poly verbs. We live in a world dominated by algorithmic reverbs, DSP-driven, kind of designed, imagined spaces for our kind of big box reverb pedals, recreations of things we associate with the real world, or completely imagined impossible sounds as well. We are also trained at this point, especially in 2023, to associate the concept of an IR or an impulse response innately with cabinet sims, because we live in an era where every 37 minutes a new amp in a box comes out, and most of those use IRs or impulse responses to capture cabinets for those kind of like digital preamps. Poly Verbs takes both of those concepts and kind of turns them on their heads. This is a MIDI-capable stereo in, stereo out, and USB updatable and customizable kind of big box reverb device in a very small, fun, compact environment that is nothing but impulse responses of real objects and spaces in the world used as reverb. But this thing is not just captures of real massive caverns and cathedrals in a box. This is also real echo plates and analog devices captured as impulse responses. Things like legendary spring reverbs, real legendary kind of recording studio rooms, that kind of thing as well. And a whole category for what they call irregular verbs. The thing about an impulse response is you can kind of capture anything as an IR and make it a reverb in this device, hence that USB port up top. Some of the weirdest and most fascinating things in here are an IR capture of the rain, an IR capture of a bubble popping, or a slinky being moved. And that's not a joke. In that intro song, in between the kind of A section and B section, you heard a couple of very strange reverb textures before the song kind of like really kicks into high gear. And then at the end of the song, some very bizarre, almost tremolo-y sounding reverbs. That's not just tremolo applied to a reverb. That is me making use of an IR in this thing that is a capture of a coin being spun on a desk. That's for real. And it sounds really cool. A lot of these sounds are obviously going to be very strange as a reverb capture, but the Poly Verbs gives you access to a controllable pre-delay, a mix control, a low cut, which can be incredibly useful in smoothing out some of these reverb buildups, as well as a smush control, which will play with the stereo space, the kind of regeneration of the reverb, and kind of just generally move some stuff in some of those captures around to make them a little bit more useful as a conventional reverb sound. It's hard to know how to talk about a reverb device that samples both a coin spinning on a desk or a train whistle, while also the inside of a nuclear reactor cooling tower. Both of those things sound so strange as reverbs, but equally beautiful as fascinating sound design approaches. In this thing, you have an oil tank that is the longest reverb in the world. The longest real space capturable as an IR is in this device, as well as like some of the most legendary vintage plate reverbs and studio rooms of all time. All those things are captured in this thing, and if you have a space that you love, you can capture your own IRs and load them into this device. The Poly Verbs is a really beautiful, strange approach to reverb in a world that is so kind of homogenous in terms of hi-fi reverbs, and I find that fascinating and beautiful. Now, having said all that, I do not think that this is a reverb for everybody, nor do I necessarily feel like I could ever make it my one go-to reverb. Even on the board as we have it standing right now, I have the Golden Reverberator last in chain directly ahead of the Poly Verbs. And my rationale for that is a lot of these spaces, because they are captures of real environments, there are built-in pre-delays that are just a consequence of the size of the space that you are capturing. And you can then extend or slightly shorten those using that onset control. But the real spaces do not operate the same way we've been trained to feel the kind of algorithmic reverbs react. And for me, for my preferences, I like to have something of a small room or plate sitting at the end of my chain to kind of offer a little bit of consistency and glue as a space alongside everything in this thing. But that is also just my preference. I'm recording this after the actual release of the Poly Verbs, and I've had a chance to watch a couple other videos from other people who have used this thing, and other people have made this sound amazing as a standalone, so it might be an idiosyncrasy of my playing style and my kind of approach to tone building, but I think that this is a really beautiful and, like I said, fascinating texture and sound design piece of gear for the way that I would kind of build a multi-verb pedal board. Because as they say, there is no substitute for the real thing, and the Poly Verbs actually does give you the closest approximation to the real thing that you are going to find. And if that's something that interests you, the Poly Verbs is directly in your wheelhouse. So let's give it a listen. As always, before we get into our sound samples, let's go ahead and talk through our signal chain and the context we're working in. I am playing my Music Man St. Vincent Goldie into the 29 pedals Una with all switches in the down position, the Electronic Audio Experiments Limelight Overdrive and Boost into the Dream by Universal Audio, which is serving as our amplifier. From there, we go to the Galaxy Tape Echo, the Poly Verbs, and then up top we have the Golden Reverberator, which is not turned on right now. And then we go out to our DAW, which is Universal Audio's Luna, where we are using a 1073 to kind of like set our input gain for our recording. And then we will be kind of like getting up to level and mastering with a tape emulation, a Neve summing plugin, and the Capital compressor. No settings on anything will change from this point on in the video. So as we hear our dry tone and then start digging into poly, if we change anything on the pedal board, we will denote it. Otherwise, everything else will be consistent. This is our dry tone. And you will know right off the bat, or you will notice right off the bat, this thing has no switches or knobs on it. All it's got is your foot switch for bypass and one for basically crescendo, which is like basically like freezes or like ramps the reverb up. The way you interact with the pedal is all touch, and it's pretty responsive, which is awesome. You can kind of touch where you want your settings to be, or you can kind of like quickly drag things around as well. I have found very few misfires. The one thing I will note when interacting with the pedal is the downside to swiping up like that is sometimes you can accidentally jump to a different bank of captures if you're not being careful in the way you kind of like move around the device, but you can just kind of set things however you want by just touching on them. Across the top, you have your different main reverb categories. And then right here, you have what is called adverbs. And they're basically they all have reverb sounds in them, but this is where you can drop in your own impulse response captures if you want your own reverbs in this thing as well. At any given point, if you have a sound you like, say we go here to Pool of the Blackstar number 1, say we want to increase our pre-delay, super high mix, bring the pre-delay down, cut some of the lows, and add a bunch of smush. You can then save this by touching and holding on number 1. You'll see that rainbow light up. And now when you come back to that setting, it will be saved like that. Whereas for everything else, this kind of mix, very little low cut and no smush or onset will be the default parameter anytime you pull up a sound, as you can tell. So we're not going to jump through every single one of the 8 presets in every single one of these because we will be here all day. And some of them have kind of some overlap with each other, like these two, 1 and 2 right here, are both from the Pool of the Blackstar. There'll be a couple where it's just 2 different captures of the same plate with different settings, that kind of thing. So what I really want to do is highlight some specific sounds that I love in each of these different engines along the way and showcase some of the kind of like interesting use cases for some of the more conventional and unconventional sounds. If you are following along at home and want to know more about the individual sounds we are making use of, I highly recommend you go to the website and pull up the manual for this thing. Not only does it have the kind of like how you organize and kind of navigate the pedal, but also on the inside, they have all the information about all the captures that we are going to be walking through in this video. And I'll be referencing this kind of off camera constantly to remind me of like what amazing spaces we're making use of. Starting things off, like I said, we have the Pool of the Blackstar. That's going to be captures number 1 and 2 on this thing. And it's basically this giant Masonic building. It sounds absolutely beautiful. Let's give it a listen. And again, this is a good place to start too, because you can hear right off the bat, onset completely out. There is still pre-delay existing in that reverb, because that's the literal reality of the space that we are operating with. Like I said, you can add more pre-delay if you want it. As well as you have the ability to add low cut. Oh, it is also worth noting there is no full wet on this pedal. It is analog dry through, fully analog dry through. So all you're doing is controlling the level of the reverb with that mix control. And of course, we have our low cut, which can be very useful for, like we said earlier, taming down some of the more bizarre, ethereal, and ambitious reverb sounds in this thing. Smush in this thing, as described by the manual, very vaguely, basically describes it as spreads and expands the sound particles to fill the void. So I think you can basically think of it as some post-processing diffusion. In some of the devices, it will actually impact the way that the IR reacts with the stereo space. This kind of first pool of the Blackstar is obviously very, very stereo, but not all of them will be. As you can hear now, we've got a very different sense of stereo with this one. And that changes with that smush control. But of course, you have access to, like I said, some really, really bizarre places. Like number 6 on this one is the Incini down oil tank, which is the longest reverb in the world. And it sounds like it. Yeah, it's pretty rad, especially with that low cut totally taken out. It can just have menace in a way that makes it sound like a giant orchestra that I really, really, really like. And of course, like I said, we also have And next up, we have the Hamilton Mausoleum, which is the longest echo in the world. According to the manual, it holds the record for the longest echo with any man-made structure in the world, taking 15 seconds for the sound of a slammed door to fade. Let's go ahead and give... The thing that I've noticed about this one is it feels a lot more gentle than the oil tank. You'll notice that the smush in this setting is also causing it to double back on itself in almost like a faux reverse kind of thing. We can take that smush out and hear the difference. Jumping back a little bit, numbers 3 through 5 in this thing are going to be a sound sculpture in Iceland with a name that I cannot pronounce, but it's in the manual and has lots of consonants. So good luck with that. And it's another great example of the way that smush can be utilized with basically the IR playing back in reverse on itself to great effect. So with it out, you still just have like a great, beautiful reverb sound. But by cranking that up, you now have access to Yeah, a lot of the stuff in this pool of the Blackstar is going to be kind of defined by its built-in pre-delay of giant spaces, as well as that kind of low control menace that you get from a truly huge concrete environment. Jumping next over to our Capricornia Caves. The first capture is going to be the aforementioned cave. Very different texture, very a lot warmer. But it's funny, this is going to be the first moment where we bring in another reverb in this video. And Polly, I hope you're fine with the fact that I'm doubling reverbs up in this video. I think that, again, this thing is such an interesting texture device. There's so much interesting... that pulling that out introducing something a little bit more conventional and gentle. You know, a very kind of subtle plate reverb that kind of is permeating and has no pre-delay. And then adding this in for character and dynamic. Yeah, it's really cool. I love it as a kind of like secondary, or like the beating heart of the actual kind of character and texture and inspiration driver here. We've taken the golden back out. Let's keep rolling through some of these caves. This is a railway tunnel in Edinburgh. Just fascinating stuff. Manipulating the waveform, the wave files, I should say, with that smush, onset, and low cut is such an interesting approach to kind of like messing with IRs, impulse response convolution reverbs like this. Oh, and of course, number 4 here is going to be Poly HQ. This is a capture of their office. And following that, I want to touch on this one, is the abandoned cooling tower from a nuclear silo or a nuclear power plant in Belgium. Like I said, some of these are going to be very, very weird. And it's worth remembering, we are not using any other wet effects right now. Next up, we are moving over to the Santa Lucia Basilica in Sicily. And then all of the kind of like spaces that go along with it. St. George's Episcopal Church in Fredericksburg in the US. There's some sounds in here that are very kind of like larger than life, and there's some that are just pretty. They don't have to all be like the biggest reverb, the largest space, that kind of thing. Like number 2 in here, you have the Pantheon of Rome, which is really cool. That's such an amazing thing to have access to. And it is beautiful. But that number 6 slot, the church in Fredericksburg, it's just like a little splash of a real room. And you take something like that, make sure we're not getting any reverb from the galaxy, and you kind of like put a delay into the front of it. And it's just beautiful, like no reverb. A nice slow delay. And you just put it into this like beautiful real world spot. And it's just a great sound. It sounds really wonderful. Let's jump out of this left side of spaces and into this right side of objects with our plates. The first 2 are going to be the EMT 140 plate. You know, the kind of classic where it all began style plate reverb. With a gigantic plate, by the way. Let's low cut some of that. And for the first time, maybe bring our mix down a little bit. Take her delay back out. And let's throw on our Limelight. Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's the EMT 140 plate. It's a classic. Why would it not sound great as long as you capture it well, which Poly has done. You've also got an echo plate from the 80s. You also have captures of like digital plates. Like this is the Lexicon 480L. Yep, you've just got some really great plates in here, and it's nice to have access to, like I said, some very real plates. That kind of perfect diffusion of a real plate. all the way through those kind of like massive Yeah, they're just excellent. Next up, you have analog devices, which is going to be a really fascinating combination of things, starting with a 1962 Fender Brownface reverb tank, things like AKG spring units, the Adneco oil can delay is in here, the K10 Fisher spring reverb, and even an RE201 space echo. Let's start off with this Brownface. This is one of those ones that I like to bring low in the mix. Let's save that sound and jump to number 2. A little bit splashier. It's a different capture of it. And then, of course, a completely different style of spring with that AKG. Shortest pre-delay that we've gotten so far, honestly. That Adneco oil can. Oof, that's beautiful. Again, that low cut is going to make it sound nothing like an oil can delay, and instead is going to kind of create a totally different style of effect. And let's wrap it up by taking a look at the Roland RE201 Space Echo. There it is. What a classic sound. mean, this is a great opportunity to put our actual galaxy in front of it, which is effectively a space echo delay. Yeah, it is so rad. And that brings us also to our irregular verbs, which is a very weird, and you'll hear it's very weird because this first one is a bunch of random objects and things that come out of ordinary IRs. Number one being bubbles. Indeed. Let's go ahead and bring that one back to a little bit more of a static point. Low cut, bunch of that smush. It is truly wild how actually great bubbles are as a reverb. Or just, once again, bring in that golden reverberator, use it as texture. Next up, we have, as if that wasn't bizarre and cool enough, this is rain. Why is rain the best reverb I've ever heard? I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me, but it's amazing. It's so fucking cool. Okay, one that we used in the kind of turnaround of our intro song is this spinning coin. Let's low cut the crap out of that because it's going to help a lot. Add a lot of that smush. So you can hear smush totally out. You can really hear the texture on the table. You crank that smush up, and it really kind of starts to diffuse it a little bit. Oh, and on the, if you heard the kind of like non-specific ambience happening in the first half of the guitar, the first half of the song at the start of the video, not the kind of swells happening on the right channel, not and not the this thing on the left channel, but that kind of soft, kind of diffused reverb thing. That was just spinning coin, just doing this. But like cranked. And the texture of that coin spinning on the table, it's just, you know, it's, let's take this out and bring that golden back in. It's just a fundamentally different, even if you crank it and make that sound really like crazy too. There we go. Let's give it a lot of juice on that golden. The golden is beautiful. It's one of my favorite like real reverbs. But that is a different thing than the sound of a coin spinning on a table as your reverb. Why is that rad? I don't know. And again, train whistle. I said we weren't going to go through every algorithm. This is going to be the one where we probably do, because yeah, it's a train whistle. Why is it awesome? It's so strange. For some reason, it works so well. And again, the next one is an IR capture of a cymbal pattern. So I don't know exactly what they mean by that. I'm assuming they mean like just scratching across the ridges of a cymbal. Yep, it's that sound. This is the category, by the way. The irregular verbs are where I get a little bit bummed out that you can't kill dry this device. Very chaotic reverbs right now. And this is the piezo auto harp. Again, that's a reverb. Why is it a reverb? Put it in front of a big kind of like conventionally beautiful reverb. Take that other reverb out. It's so strange, but it's so cool. And then, of course, we'll skip the bathtub because we're running so long as it is. This is a slinky. Yeah, you're welcome. This is a slinky. Unbelievable. Once more before we leave this section, just one beautiful chord with the rain. It's so cool. Like I said, this last section right here are your adverbs. It's a collection of just kind of like random additional IRs they had that you can replace with your own if you want. There are some really cool things in here. Things like number 2 is RCA Studio B in Nashville. So it is just straight up the one of the rooms at a beloved recording studio, which is really nice to have if you want it. Like some great rock and roll guitar tone right there. And yet you can still make the RCA Studio B sound otherworldly and crazy if you want it to. You have Maes Howe in Orkney, which is some bizarre Neolithic chamber in Scotland. Number 3 is going to be, yes, the UK's O2 Theatre. Absolutely wild. And let's go ahead and wrap it up with number 8, just for posterity, so we can feel like we completed everything. This is a Roman gigantic outdoor theater. Again, it's just like an iconic real space.